Ferrari may have just forced Mercedes to remove the upgrade that helped protect its championship lead. And the wildest part is, Ferrari knew exactly where to strike, because the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile had already forced Ferrari to remove a similar diffuser idea before the season even began. So when Mercedes arrived with its serrated diffuser on the W16, Ferrari did not just complain. They brought evidence. They asked why Mercedes was allowed to keep a concept Ferrari had already been told to abandon. And now, right before the Austrian Grand Prix, the rulebook may have turned into Ferrari's sharpest weapon. Mercedes leads. Ferrari is hunting. The Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile is closing the door. And if this ban takes effect, the biggest loss for Mercedes may not be the part itself. It may be the confidence that disappeared with it. Subscribe to the channel. To understand why Ferrari's move hit Mercedes so hard, you have to start with one simple truth. Formula One is not only a race between cars. It is a race between interpretations. Every team reads the same rulebook. Every team sees the same technical regulations. Every team knows where the official boundaries are supposed to be. But the best teams do not just ask, what do the rules say? They ask, what do the rules almost allow? That tiny space between clear legality and forbidden design is where championships can be shaped. It is where engineers search for hidden performance. It is where rivals get nervous. And it is where Ferrari found the opening that could turn the Austrian Grand Prix into a major political strike against Mercedes. Because this story did not begin with Mercedes. It began with Ferrari. During the pre-season legality checks for the 2026 cars, Ferrari had a diffuser specification on the SF26 that caught the attention of the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile. The part was linked to the same aerodynamic battlefield now causing trouble for Mercedes, the area underneath the rear of the car, where airflow is managed to create grip. And Ferrari was told to remove it. That detail changes everything. Because Ferrari did not just lose a part. They lost development time. They lost a design direction. They lost something they had spent energy, people, and factory hours trying to make work. And in Formula One, losing time in winter is brutal. Winter is when teams build the foundation of their season. The car is still being shaped. Ideas are still being tested. The first race is coming fast. Every day matters, because a mistake made before the season can follow a team for months. So when Ferrari had to remove its diffuser idea, Maranello learned a painful lesson. The Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile had drawn a line. Maybe not a loud line. Maybe not a public line that every fan could see. But inside the technical world of Formula One, Ferrari knew where it had been stopped. And that knowledge became important later. Because when the Mercedes W16 appeared with its own serrated diffuser extension, Ferrari saw more than a clever rival upgrade. They saw a question. A very dangerous question. Why them, and not us? That is where this controversy became explosive. The Mercedes part was described as a serrated diffuser extension. Serrated means jagged, like the edge of a saw. In everyday language, imagine the smooth edge of a kitchen knife compared with a bread knife. One is clean and simple. The other has teeth that interact with the surface differently. In Formula One airflow, those teeth can matter. They can influence how the air separates, how it reconnects, and how smoothly it leaves the back of the car. And when airflow behaves better, the car can gain downforce, stability, or efficiency. Put more simply, the car can grip better without paying too much in drag. That is why Mercedes wanted the concept. And that is why Ferrari was watching. Because the diffuser is not just another part. It sits in one of the most powerful aerodynamic zones on the car. The air underneath a modern Formula One car is everything. It helps pull the car toward the track, giving the driver the confidence to brake later, turn faster, and accelerate earlier. If that air becomes messy, the driver feels it immediately. The rear gets nervous. The tires slide more. The car becomes harder to trust. And at a circuit like the Red Bull Ring, trust is priceless. Austria is not a long, forgiving track where a weakness can stay hidden for lap after lap. The lap is short. The corners are sharp. The braking zones are heavy. The margins are compressed. If a car loses even a small amount of useful rear performance, the stopwatch notices quickly. But here is the part most fans miss. Ferrari was not simply saying Mercedes had copied them. That would be too simple, and probably too weak. Ferrari's case was more precise. They had already been forced to remove a similar idea. Mercedes had then appeared with a related concept. So Ferrari asked the governing body to explain why one version had been rejected, while another was being allowed to race. That is not just technical curiosity. That is legal pressure. And legal pressure in Formula One can be as powerful as a new engine. Because once the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile is forced to explain a boundary, that boundary becomes harder to ignore. The gray area becomes smaller. The discussion becomes official. Other teams start paying attention. Journalists start asking questions. The team under scrutiny has to defend something that was previously just part of the car. That is exactly where Mercedes found itself. The first answer from the governing body was subtle. Mercedes' version was reportedly considered technically compliant because its exact geometry was different from Ferrari's earlier design. In other words, the concept may have lived in the same neighborhood, but not in the same house. That difference mattered. Mercedes could argue that it had developed in dialogue with the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, and that it had the assurances it needed. Ferrari could argue that the principle was still too close to the line that had already cost them performance. Both positions could sound reasonable. And that is what made the dispute so dangerous. Because the most explosive Formula One fights are not always about something clearly legal or clearly illegal. They are about something that depends on interpretation. And interpretation can change. Ferrari understood this. They did not just walk away from the first clarification. They studied it. They used it. They built their own legal version of the serrated diffuser concept and introduced it at Monaco, then carried that idea into the larger upgrade package used in Barcelona. That matters because Barcelona was not just another race. Barcelona was the moment Ferrari proved the fight was still alive. Lewis Hamilton won for Ferrari there, giving the Scuderia its first victory of the 2026 season. Suddenly, Ferrari was not just a team complaining from behind. Ferrari was a team with momentum, with proof, and with a stronger reason to turn every small Mercedes advantage into a major battlefield. That changed the tone. Before Barcelona, the diffuser dispute could have looked like frustration. After Barcelona, it looked like strategy. And this is where the story starts to feel very Ferrari. Emotional, yes. Political, absolutely. But also calculated. Ferrari had been hurt by the rule boundary in winter. Then it watched Mercedes benefit from a similar area. Then it built its own legal version. Then it used its experience to push the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile toward a stricter clarification. That is not random. That is a team turning pain into leverage. And in Formula One, leverage is everything. Mercedes had the championship lead. Ferrari needed ways to close the gap. On track, that meant upgrades, race execution, tire management, and driver performance. But off track, it meant something just as important. Forcing Mercedes to spend time defending. Because when a team is defending, it is not fully attacking. That is the hidden value of Ferrari's evidence. Even before any final enforcement, the pressure itself changes the situation. Mercedes has to think about replacement parts. It has to think about whether the diffuser can stay. It has to think about how the car behaves without it. It has to prepare explanations. It has to manage driver confidence and public messaging at the same time. That is not free. Nothing in Formula One pressure is free. Every hour spent protecting one idea is an hour not fully spent developing the next one. And Ferrari knows that because it lived the same problem before the season began. This is why the Austrian Grand Prix became such a dangerous deadline. If the reported ban or removal instruction takes effect in Austria, Mercedes does not get a calm laboratory environment. It gets a race weekend. A public stage. A short circuit where small gaps become obvious. A championship fight where every point matters. And a Ferrari team arriving with fresh confidence. That combination is brutal. Because the problem for Mercedes is not just the lost component. It is the chain reaction. Remove or alter the diffuser extension, and the airflow at the rear may change. Change the airflow, and the balance may shift. Shift the balance, and the drivers may need a different setup. Change the setup, and tire behavior may change. Change tire behavior, and race strategy becomes harder. This is how one small part can become a full weekend problem. It is like changing one ingredient in a recipe right before serving dinner. Maybe the meal still works. Maybe nobody notices. But if that ingredient was quietly holding the whole flavor together, suddenly everything tastes different. That is what Mercedes has to fear. Not disaster. Difference. A car can still be fast and feel different enough to disturb the driver. And at the front of Formula One, disturbed is often enough to lose. For Ferrari, the goal is obvious. Make Mercedes uncomfortable. Not necessarily destroy them. Not necessarily prove they did something wrong. Just make them operate under pressure. Make them answer questions. Make them adapt. Make them wonder if the advantage they trusted is still available. Make the engineers check the rulebook while Ferrari checks the timing screen. That is championship warfare. And it is why this first block matters so much. Because the headline says Ferrari's evidence got Mercedes upgrade banned. But the deeper story is sharper. Ferrari found a way to turn fairness into a weapon. They took a rule boundary that once hurt them and pushed it back toward their biggest rival. They forced the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile to look again. They made Mercedes defend a concept that had helped its car remain strong in a season where every aerodynamic gain matters. And now the pressure moves to Austria. Because once the cars arrive at the Red Bull Ring, theory becomes lap time. Mercedes will have to show whether the W16 can survive without the disputed serrated diffuser extension, or whether Ferrari has just removed one of the quiet pieces holding the silver arrows together. That is the real tension. Not just whether the part is legal. Not just whether Ferrari was right. But whether Mercedes can stay calm when Ferrari has changed the battlefield. And the next piece of the story is even more dangerous, because Ferrari may not have been trying only to stop Mercedes. They may have been trying to expose exactly how much of Mercedes' advantage depended on that one forbidden edge. The moment Ferrari forced the question into the open, Mercedes stopped facing a normal upgrade dispute. They started facing a timing problem. Because in Formula One, when a rival challenges your car after months of development, the damage is not only about whether a part stays or goes. The damage is about when the challenge arrives. And Ferrari chose the worst possible moment for Mercedes. Right before Austria. Right before a short, fast, exposed circuit where tiny performance losses can become visible almost immediately. Right before a weekend where Mercedes needed to protect its championship lead, not explain why one of its most sensitive aerodynamic ideas might have to disappear. That is where this story becomes much more dangerous. Because the Mercedes serrated diffuser was not some decorative edge at the back of the car. It was connected to one of the most valuable parts of a modern Formula One machine, the airflow underneath the rear floor. That air is invisible to the audience. But to the car, it is everything. It decides how planted the rear feels. It helps the driver trust the car when braking hard. It supports the tires when the car is loaded through a corner. It can make the difference between a driver attacking the track and a driver quietly protecting the car from sliding. And that is why Ferrari's evidence mattered so much. Ferrari did not have to prove that Mercedes had built a dramatic illegal monster. They only had to prove that the boundary was no longer clear enough. That is the power of a technical clarification. It sounds calm. It sounds bureaucratic. It sounds like paperwork. But inside a Formula One team, it can feel like an alarm going off. Because once the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile clarifies a rule, the car you trusted yesterday may need to change tomorrow. And when that happens during a championship fight, every hour becomes expensive. Mercedes reportedly argued that replacement parts were not ready. And that point matters, because fans often imagine a Formula One team can simply remove one part, bolt on another, and continue as if nothing happened. But that is not reality. A Formula One car is a chain reaction. The diffuser affects the air behind the floor. That airflow affects the rear balance. The rear balance affects how the driver turns the car. The way the driver turns affects tire temperature. Tire temperature affects stint length. Stint length affects strategy. So when Ferrari challenges one piece, it is never only one piece. It can shake the whole race plan. Think of it like pulling one card from a carefully built tower. Maybe the tower stays up. Maybe it barely moves. But everyone in the room holds their breath, because nobody knows whether that one card was quietly supporting more than it seemed. That is the problem Mercedes suddenly had to solve. Not in a private test. Not in a calm winter program. At a Grand Prix weekend. With Ferrari watching. With the governing body watching. With every rival team asking the same question. How much of the Mercedes advantage lives inside that diffuser? That is the question Ferrari wanted the paddock to ask. Because once that question exists, Mercedes has to answer it on track. And that is brutal. If Mercedes remains fast, Ferrari's political move looks less damaging. But if Mercedes loses even a small amount of rear stability, the entire narrative changes. Suddenly, every slow sector becomes suspicious. Every tire issue looks connected. Every uncomfortable radio message becomes evidence that Ferrari hit the right target. This is how pressure grows. Not from one headline. From interpretation. And Ferrari is very good at making interpretation feel emotional. Because this was not just about fairness. It was about memory. Ferrari remembered being told to remove its own diffuser specification before the season began. Ferrari remembered losing that design route. Ferrari remembered the frustration of watching a concept die before it could become a race weapon.